All right, so I'm going to start with the resolution, which is that the United States federal government should significantly decrease the role of Southern Command in Latin America. As the person providing the affirmative, I am allowed to define, and I would like to define this as a resolution of policy. Now, how would I like to have this achieved? I would like the Western Hemisphere Institute of Security Cooperations, also known as WHINSEC. It should be shut down without rebranding. The reason I say rebranding is because from 1946 to 2001, it was also known as the School of the Americas. Now, just so you guys know, this will be, those two words are synonymous. So the School of the Americas is WHINSEC. Who will be affected? Countries in Latin America. When would I like this to take place? As soon as possible. Who will be enacting it? Congress. Now, since I am the individual affirming the topic, I would like this to be judged by net benefits. Let's start with the first advantage, which is human rights violations. Many of these human rights are also just in our Constitution. That's why that might sound very familiar to some of you. I think it's important for me to now define human rights. Human rights are the basic rights and freedoms to which all humans are considered to be entitled, often held to include the rights to life, liberty, equality, and a fair trial, freedom from slavery and torture, and the freedom of thought and expression. All right, and now let's start with the harm human rights violations are being committed. There are terrible atrocities that are being committed by School of the Americas and WHINSEC graduates. All right, so now I'm gonna get started on the inherency. And the first one is that human rights violations are cruel and by definition evil. Just in case some of you were wondering, the definition of evil is immoral and malevolent, which means done with malice and, done just out of spite. Those committing human rights violations see their victims as less than human. That might be a hard concept for some people in first world countries to grasp, since this usually only happens in war zones. But occasionally we will see news stories on the news of, human rights violations being committed in the United States. But the point I'm trying to make is this normally only happens in war-torn territories. But monitoring groups have discovered and disclosed that WHINSEC students are disproportionately involved in human rights violations, including rape, mass murder, and the scorched earth tactic. Some people may wonder what scorched earth tactics are. Scorched earth tactics are when people burn down resources, anything that could be useful. So they burn down homes, they burn down entire villages, crops, fields, anything that could be useful. So those that do survive the mass murder and rape have no homes to go back to. In a response to questions by Al Jazeera, Colonel Keith Anthony, who is actually the commandant of WHINSEC currently, answered that no matter how much you train them, once they return back to their own countries, they're going to do what they're going to do, and it is out of our hands. Now, this may sound very apathetic, because it is. We don't seem to care what they do because we can't do anything about it. While we could still be held accountable for training these people that are committing these atrocities. In fact, during the El Salvadorian Civil War, 60% of atrocities were committed by the army, including extrajudicial executions, enforced disappearances, murders of political opponents. School of the Americas grads were actually directly involved in high-profile killings, including that of Archbishop Oscar Romero, who spoke out against poverty, social injustice, assassination, and torture, which were being committed by the army at the time. His message and murder had such an impact that in 2010, the United Nations General Assembly proclaimed March 24th, which was the day that he was assassinated while giving a sermon, as the International Day for the right to the truth concerning gross human rights violations and for the dignity of victims. The solvency for this is by closing WHINSEC, those committing human rights violations will not have the advantage of having been trained by the United States military, which is arguably the best military in the world, including training in torture techniques, which has since been proven to be ineffective. The impacts that this will have is there will be less human rights violations, and there will be no need for American apathy because we will not have trained immoral people in warfare and torture. The second harm that I would like to address is that things are bad in these countries, which is clear with all the human rights violations that are going on. The inherency I have for this is that American interference in South American politics is bad. Now, you might be asking, why would America be interfering in their politics just by training them? The actual school was founded in 1946, and from 1961 it was assigned with the specific goal of teaching anti-communist counterinsurgency training, a role which it would fulfill until for the rest of the Cold War. There are other instances in which graduates have been involved in coups against leftist governments, most notably in Honduras and Venezuela, which is a problem because these are independent countries and they don't need the United States meddling in their politics. By involving ourselves in their politics, it undermines their democracy of foreign nations. We would not want foreign nations undermining the process of our democracy, which can be seen with the current news cycle that's going around with possible ties of the Trump campaign and Russia. Another huge issue here is that at least 11 Latin American dictators have been trained by WHINSEC since its opening in 1948, more than any school in history. In fact, one of those dictators, General Leopoldo Galtieri of Argentina, led his country into war with Great Britain over the Falkland Islands, which was a big deal in the 1980s. The United States trained somebody that got into a war with one of our closest allies. The School of the Americas has had such an impact that former Panamanian President George Eluche is stated as saying that the School of the Americas was the biggest base for destabilization in Latin America. The solvency I'd like to add for this is that closing WHINSEC is a show of good faith to those countries who have previously been affected by its meddling. The impact that this would have is that countries are allowed to regulate themselves without the U.S. undermining the democratic process, and that our relationships with these countries could improve due to the fact that there's transparency that we are no longer involved and no longer training people that could take control forcefully. In conclusion, I would like to restate that the United States should significantly decrease the role of Southern Command in Latin America by closing WHINSEC.